Salavan and Rykov. Translation checker, Pew Pew laser gun. Editor and proofreader, Leo of Zion Mountain and Dale Ligerkeys. Many people saw Yang Kai bringing Lu Xianyun into Endless Treasures Pavilion, and these cultivators had nothing to do, so they naturally wanted to watch the fun. Then, when the door was shut by the burly bald-headed man, they couldn't see the situation inside anymore. Even though they couldn't see inside, the violent energy fluctuations and the banging noises going back and forth inside were not fake. During this short period of time, the number of cultivators gathering to watch the action had already gone up to several thousand. When Yang Kai opened the door at this moment and came out, he was immediately greeted by several thousand pairs of eyes. None of them could believe what they were seeing, though. They all thought that Yang Kai did not know the immensity of heaven and earth and actually dared to stir trouble in Marsh City's Endless Treasures Pavilion. Wasn't that courting death? Without even mentioning the Endless Treasures Pavilion's backer, the City Lord, the cultivators in Endless Treasures Pavilion themselves were extremely strong. The head shopkeeper was even at peak Dao realm. If he were not too old, affecting his meridians and his body, then this old man would definitely have the qualifications to break through to the Emperor realm. They thought that Yang Kai was definitely going to eat a big loss this time. But they were taken aback at the scene before them. Yang Kai walked out of the Endless Treasures Pavilion unharmed and without even a wrinkle on his clothes. On the other hand, there were several corpses lying inside Endless Treasures Pavilion with blood splattered everywhere. As for the burly bald-headed man and the Endless Treasures Pavilion's head shopkeeper, they were pale-faced with shriveled auras. One could tell at a glance that their cultivations had been crippled. A chorus of gasps could be heard, and the looks in many cultivators' eyes finally changed as they looked at Yang Kai. They realized that this young man was definitely not someone to be messed with, and there was even a high possibility that he was an emperor. After all, how long had he been in there? To be able to turn Endless Treasures Pavilion into such a mess in just several dozen breaths of time, how could he have such power if he were not an emperor? When Yang Kai walked out, the cultivators gathered close by could not help but step backwards, eyes filled with fear. Yang Kai swept a cold glance around and coldly snorted, not paying him any mind. He just brought Lu Xianyun over to the tea house opposite the street, going back to that table on the third floor, then ordering another pot of spirit tea. He caused a huge ruckus in Endless Treasures Pavilion and both injured and killed their men, but he did not escape. Instead, he just went into the tea house opposite the building to drink tea. The people who were gathered there to watch the show were all looking at him in disbelief. They all secretly admired Yang Kai's fearlessness and felt that he was either strong enough to have no fear of Pan Guang, or had a strong enough background that would put Pan Guang on guard. But as they were unrelated to Yang Kai, they couldn't be bothered to care about all that. Instead, the open doors of the Endless Treasure Pavilion were of greater interest to these cultivators right now. The cultivators in Marsh City were basically the gruff type that value human life as little as grass. Naturally, they wouldn't care who was right or wrong in this situation. However, since the spirit grasses, medicines, and other precious treasures in Endless Treasures Pavilion were unguarded right now, it was a good opportunity for them. Even though Endless Treasures Pavilion was the property of Pan Guang, men die for wealth and birds die for food. When it comes to this, some people will eventually feel their hearts itch. After a moment of silence, a figure suddenly leapt out from the crowd, rushing straight into Endless Treasures Pavilion and sweeping all the spirit grasses and medicines on the shelves into his space ring. Seeing this, how could the others stay still? The cultivators flooding into the Endless Treasures Pavilion to rob them while they were down were as many as carps crossing the river. In just a short while, Endless Treasures Pavilion had been swept clean. Anything that was worth something had disappeared, and with the things gone, the cultivators also quickly scattered and disappeared. Upstairs in the tea house, Yang Kai watched the sight indifferently. However, he did have some insight into how the cultivators were here in Marsh City now. Senior brother, Lu Xianyun felt uneasy as if she were sitting on pins and needles. I think we better go. It wasn't that she wasn't confident in Yang Kai's abilities, but a huge situation had erupted and she was the cause of it all. She didn't want to provoke any stronger enemies for Yang Kai. No need. Yang Kai smiled and poured her a cup of spiritual tea. This place is a mess. How did you end up here? He was still quite curious about Lu Xianyun's situation after not seeing her for several years. After they fled from Blue Feather Sect, he gave the bigger half of his belongings to Lu Xianyun at the time and the two went off into different directions. After that, Yang Kai went to Maplewood City, working hard till now. He didn't expect to be able to bump into Lu Xianyun while passing by Marsh City this time. I've been here many years now. Lu Xianyun smiled bitterly and briefly told him about her situation during these past few years. In fact, there was nothing much to tell. After parting with Yang Kai, she had been roaming around the southern territory like a fly without a head. It wasn't until she arrived at Marsh City that she settled down. Even though Marsh City was chaotic, there were many places nearby that were suitable for her to train. She was able to look for some cultivational resources in those places, and after a few years, though she lived a hard life, she still managed to break through to the Dao Source realm. Some days ago, she found a spirit flower in a place nearby called the Solitary Void Mountain Range, so she thought of bringing it back to sell for some source crystals. She thought that the Endless Treasures Pavilion would be a good place to pawn the spirit flower since it was backed by the city lord, but she didn't expect him to offer her only 10,000 low-rank source crystals after they saw what she was offering. Even though Lu Xianyun had no idea what the spirit flower she found was, or what it was used for, she had a feeling that it was definitely worth more than just a few source crystals, so how could she be willing to sell? After trying to bargain with him, they even put their hands on her, and Yang Kai knew what happened next. "Senior brother, you should take this spirit flower. I don't know what it is anyway." While speaking, Lu Xianyun handed the jade box to Yang Kai. "Let me see." Yang Kai took it and unsealed the box, opening it up a slit. In a flash, a fresh fragrance spilled out from the box. When the smell entered his nose, Yang Kai felt invigorated and his knowledge sea also cleared up considerably. With a clang, Yang Kai quickly shut the jade box, face filled with disbelief. Soul-warming lotus. Even though he had only opened the jade box a crack, his divine sense could see the spirit flower laying inside that looked like his soul-warming lotus. Only, it wasn't as colorful. Instead, it was pure white. The aura that came out of it was somewhat similar to the soul-warming lotus, as if it were a soul-warming lotus that had been shrunken a dozen times. No, this isn't a soul-warming lotus. It was said that the soul-warming lotus was a supreme treasure in this world. Just like the immortal tree, only one existed in the world. There was definitely no other. Pristine soul heavenly restoration lotus. Yang Kai suddenly remembered the information recorded on the jade slip left behind by Wondrous Pill Great Emperor's third disciple, Gong Sunmu, and immediately realized what this spirit medicine was. This was clearly the legendary Pristine Soul Heavenly Restoration Lotus. The Pristine Soul Heavenly Restoration Lotus was not as precious as the soul-warming lotus, but it was still a legendary item. Just like the flesh incarnation fruit, it was an extinct treasure. The Pristine Soul Restoring Heavenly Pill was refined with the Pristine Soul Heavenly Restoration Lotus as its primary ingredient. Even though it did not have the effect of raising the dead, it was still able to repair the broken meridians and danshan of a cultivator. It was definitely a divine treasure. Take the burly bald-headed man and the head shopkeeper of Endless Treasures Pavilion for example. Even though their cultivations were crippled by Yang Kai, if they took a heavenly restoration pill, it would take less than 3 months before their broken meridians and danshan would become as good as new. But this thing only existed in the legends, and it had not appeared in public in thousands of years. Who knew what sort of problems those people from the Endless Treasures Pavilion had in their heads when they tried to buy this Pristine Soul Heavenly Restoration Lotus by force for just 10,000 low-rank source crystals? 10,000 trivial low-rank source crystals weren't even enough to sniff this Pristine Soul Heavenly Restoration Lotus's aura. The people at Endless Treasures Pavilion may not have recognized the Pristine Soul Heavenly Restoration Lotus, but they definitely knew this was worth a lot of money. If they really tried to pay for it fairly, they may not have been able to afford it, so they simply stole it instead. The Pristine Soul Restoring Heavenly Pill's medicinal effects did not just stop at repairing the meridians and danshan. It had other special uses too. In any case, the Pristine Soul Restoring Heavenly Pill's worth was definitely invaluable. Yang Kai also did not expect Lu Xianyun to have such fortune to obtain such a divine treasure. "Junior sister, do you remember where you got this spirit flower from?" Yang Kai lowered his voice. Deep inside the Solitary Void Mountain Range. A hint of fear rose up in Lu Xianyun as she recalled her time there. "I was chased by a monster beast and was only able to escape it by running through random paths. Otherwise, I wouldn't have gone there myself. I heard that the deepest part of the Solitary Void Mountain Range is a place where even an Emperor Realm Master would not be able to return safely from once they went in. So, it was all thanks to luck that I was able to make it out this time. If I asked you to go there again, would you be able to find the right path?" "Go there again?" Lu Xianyun's pretty face paled a little and she asked, "To do what?" It was absolutely thanks to luck that she was able to escape safely last time. If she were to go again, Lu Xianyun didn't have the slightest confidence that she could escape alive, so she had no idea why Yang Kai wanted to take such a risk. Because, Yang Kai was just about to explain to her the reason, but before he could finish, he suddenly frowned and looked downstairs. He could see, standing in front of the door of Endless Treasures Pavilion, a middle-aged man dressed in a luxurious robe with a dark look on his face. The man had an extraordinary air about him and was, impressively, an Emperor Realm Master. He seemed to have sensed Yang Kai's gaze and looked over in an instant, eyes as sharp as that of a hawk's. It's Pan Guang. Lu Xianyun also saw the middle-aged man and immediately cried out in panic. Having been in Marsh City for so many years, she naturally knew very well what Pan Guang looked like. When she saw him come here in person, she knew they were in big trouble. She had no idea how Yang Kai could be so confident as to stay, but an Emperor Realm Master clearly wasn't someone who was easy to deal with. On the other side, Pan Guang suddenly moved, disappearing in an instant. By the time he reappeared, he had already arrived on the third floor of the tea house, standing in front of Yang Kai and Lu Xianyun. Lu Xianyun was so shocked that she screamed, blood draining from her face in an instant.